because of the flight path, you're only allowed to build up to a certain height in some areas. And so we're taking that into consideration. And then there's also climate change happening. And so we have sea level rise and 100-year floods that we're taking into consideration. And then we also did a market analysis, and one of like the top 3 things that our self-consultants that were working on this determined is that biotechnology is currently the primary driver of development of activity in the city. And it's been getting increasingly popular, and they've also been, I think it makes up 30% of the jobs. As of 2018, it was 30% of the jobs in the city. And that has led to a strong demand for production, distribution, and repair. And so that particularly focuses on logistics and distribution. But something that the analysis found was that these, like the industrial land, rent is increasing as there is biotechnology coming up around them. And so it's harder for them to pay the rent. And so one of the things that we're thinking about, and we also, you're going to see in the alternatives, is that we see that there's an opportunity for increasing the density of industrial, so making it like multi-story warehousing or distribution, and that can give it an opportunity to stay there as the biotechnology is growing. And then there's also opportunities to expand retail, and it's going to be linked with the growth in households and workers. And so you're going to see that in a lot of our alternatives, we have a lot of purples, and that's a lot of mixed use. And so it's really thinking about bringing in not just housing, but jobs as well. And there's been a lot of interest in bringing in different types of retail, like a lot of new businesses, a lot of restaurants, a lot of bars and entertainment. And then we also want to acknowledge that this pandemic has been happening, and it's really exacerbated inequality for a lot of people, particularly like the folks that are most vulnerable to a lot of the things that we, like I wrote the health equity existing conditions report. And so a lot of the things that we were seeing there, like impacts to like Black folks, like Latinos, like Asian Pacific Islanders, like there's a lot happening, and it's really changed our travel behavior. Like I'm doing this conference call from home. Folks aren't really going to their offices. There's been a decrease in like uses of like hotels or like retail. And then it's also important to acknowledge that there's been a lot of national demonstrations happening because of racial justice issues and the death of George Floyd and the impacts that many other folks of color have seen, like especially like Black folks. And so the city, as you know, is doing, has the Mayor's Commission on Racial and Social Equity. And so they're going to be thinking about what types of actions and recommendations they can do, not only for the city currently, and not just stuff focusing on planning, but on a lot of other topics. But as we're working on this general plan, we're making sure that we are taking what recommendations and actions they've determined, and we're applying it to the general plan. And then I also wanted to talk about the regional housing needs uncertainty. And so in the last 5 years, like from 2015 to 2020, the city's built about 1,000 housing units, or permitted 1,000 housing units. And this is something that each city is required to build a certain number of housing units, and it's something that the state passes down to us. And then different regions like the Bay Area then passes it on to different cities. And so we've been hearing recently that by the next regional housing needs assessment cycle, which is 22 to 2030, that these regions are going to be asking each city to build 2 to 4 times the current RENA allocation. And so in the last, well, the cycle that we're currently in right now, the city had been asked to build about like almost 2,000 units. And so if that increases, that's asking the city to build between like 7,400 units to 3,700 units. And this general plan is a long-term plan. And so we're not just thinking about it till 2030, we're thinking about it from 2040 to 2045. And that's why when we are looking at these alternatives, we're talking about housing that ranges from like 11,000 units to 22,000 units. And Ethan, you had a question.
Isn't the state going to start penalizing municipalities if they don't meet the RHNA numbers?
Yes and no. I think there's always been some level of penalizing, and I think it may change. I think in Southern California, their regional housing needs assessment came earlier than ours. And so a lot of the cities said, no, we're not doing it. And they are in the process of fighting back. And so so yes and no. But I think what we're seeing on our end is that that's why we're trying to really take into consideration what these ranges are, and we're trying to plan for them so that that doesn't happen. And also because in a lot of the feedback we've been hearing, like housing is a really big deal and people want more housing here.
Diana, you might have already mentioned this, but a lot of the funding that the city gets for transportation improvements and others comes by meeting a lot of these requirements. So if there would be a penalty, it might be not getting the funds that they would get otherwise. So that might be considered kind of a penalty in that way. So it is important for the city to think proactively and try to stay up with the demand, which is where these numbers kind of come from. Great question, Ethan.
So another thing we looked at is all of the feedback we've been getting from you. This is just an example of what we have from the community visioning survey that we completed, I think late last year. So showing where folks wanted to see housing and where folks wanted to see parks. We also, so now we're going to jump into the land use alternatives. I wanted to start by briefly explaining what the current general plan shows right now. So this is that general plan land use map that I showed you, but the colors have been simplified a bit more. So yeah, the colors have been simplified a bit more. And so this was adopted in 1999, and there were updates in 2015. And that was implementing the downtown station area plan as well as the El Camino Chestnut area plan. And those plans really focused on new housing growth. And then this plan also wanted to maintain employment areas in east of 101 and Lindenville. And so we did an analysis where we said, okay, so if we keep this up until 2040, like what's going to happen? And we saw that jobs are going to increase, but that housing is going to increase a little bit, but it's not going to help with the jobs and housing balance. And so we then started thinking about the different big ideas that we had that should be considered in all of these alternatives that we've been doing. And it's things that we've heard from all of you and from all of the research that we did. And it's things like maintaining the city as an economic engine for the region, because it's a big job center, not just for the city, but for the whole Bay Area. And also figuring out how to balance the office research and development as well as the industrial. And then we had producing workforce and affordable housing. We've heard from a lot of you that that's something really important. And it's not just for current residents, but also for future residents. And then we also had reinforcing downtown as the heart of the community. And we heard this a lot from community members. And it's also following what was not only in the last general plan, but also in that downtown station area plan. And then we have creating mixed use transit-oriented communities near the Caltrain station connected to downtown. And this is once again bringing an opportunity for more jobs and housing, but it's also bringing that opportunity for more transit access. And so folks can more easily walk, bike, and take transit to get to these amenities and to their housing. And then we have improving multimodal mobility, which focuses on the whole city. So just improving that opportunity, like I said, for folks to walk, bike, and take transit throughout the city. And in a safe way, because we were hearing that a lot from folks. And then addressing sea level rise, because we know that climate change is happening and we know that it's going to impact Lindenville and east of 101 the most. We were been thinking about how to make sure that there can be protections put into place. And that's where that example of the increasing the density of industrial is, because then it makes the area more competitive, so it's not going to, sorry, I lost my train of thought. So it can get those investments so that then it can pay to do those improvements that are needed so that they won't flood. And then last but not least, we have transforming Colma Creek, and this is thinking about how to make a creek not just a waterway to make sure that flooding doesn't happen, but also to make sure that it's a place where people can gather, where they can be connected to nature, and also just improving accessibility from like east of 101 through downtown to Orange Park and into the rest of the city. And so I also wanted to show you how we mapped these big ideas out to give you an idea of what these alternatives, yes?
So real quick, we wanted to do a quick poll there just to get
Oh,
a sense.
sorry. Thank you.
No problem. Yeah, so we just wanted to give you all an opportunity to real quickly weigh in. Obviously, you don't have to have just one that would be your top idea, but we just wanted to get a gut check on these top ideas that are put out there, which you might consider being your top choice. And again, feel free to give us any additional comments or suggestions beyond just taking this poll, but just wanted to kind of get a sense from you all where you're leaning. Looks like you've almost all taken the poll, maybe one or two other folks. Okay, great, that was quick, thanks. So let's see the results. All right, looks
so
like.
Most people see, go for it.
No, go ahead, Diana.
Producing workforce and affordable housing at 44%, followed by reinforcing downtown as the heart of the community at 33%. And then we have transforming Colma Creek and addressing sea level rise both at 11%.
That's great.
Thank you. And make sure to stop me, Dave.
No problem, you're on a roll. Any follow-up comments or thoughts based on those results that you all wanted to share at this point? We'll have opportunity as well, but anything you all wanted to share? No? Okay.
I kind of have one.
Sure, go ahead.
I know that technically there is a mixed-use transit area near BART, but I really think that that should also be a priority as well.
Oh,
They're big idea.
Great call. Transit near BART. Okay, great. Thank you. Great suggestion.
I wanted to ask about building kind of multi-use housing near Westboro, and how that looks like, because I noticed that Westboro is kind of mainly untouched.
Say that, sorry, one more time.
Just like the possible options on like building more apartment housing in near Westboro, you know, because it's mainly residential housing. I didn't really notice many changes happening to that area.
Okay, so when we go through the alternatives, we do have, I think there's one thing in particular to Westboro. You'll notice as we do go through the alternatives is that a lot of these alternatives focus in on things happening in east of 101 and Lindenville and downtown and El Camino. But I am going to highlight a few things like in Westboro and Winston-Salem. And so when we start having those discussions, like, please tell us like where you think more of that type of apartment housing should be.
And I just really wanted to go off of what Monique said, and yeah, I guess the statement I really wanted to make is that as someone who's like young, I guess for the youth, like obviously one of the most important issues for us is housing, because it pertains to whether or not we'll be able to like return to the community we grew up in. But I guess I understand that it's important to build affordable housing, but I guess I just wanted to bring up the concern that it seems like it's the east side and like the downtown that's bearing the brunt of the responsibility to build this housing that we clearly do need. So I don't know, and with that being a predominantly like low income area, I guess I just wanted to bring up the idea that maybe you should just, spread the possibility of building apartments into more of the residential areas rather than continuing to build in the east side, which is like I said, low income and is facing the threat of gentrification. So I just wanted to bring up that concern.
I would also like to piggyback off of what they were saying, and I do think we should totally like start like not necessarily like Like we totally should like upzone like Winston, Sarah, and Westboro, and like probably like the Sign Hilly, Paradise Valley area, but like also around the El Camino Real. Like there needs to be housing. Yeah, because it's not necessarily fair that downtown has all the housing developments, but it would be better if it wasn't the only place that had all the housing developments. And I know that is a generalization, but it is bearing the brunt of most of the development.
Okay.
I also had a question, if that's
Thank
okay.
you. Yeah.
Everybody could hear me, right?
Sure.
Yeah.
Yeah.
I was just also going to say, I also agree that there's a tremendous need of housing, especially in the east side as well. But I just had like a quick question about the idea of diversifying where housing exactly is implemented throughout South San Francisco. So I understand that the process usually for affordable housing, there's a general wait list that people would have to sign up for in advance, and that might take months to years. So what would the difference be if housing were implemented in a specific part of South San Francisco? Let's say it isn't in the east side, but someone from the east side could apply to that affordable housing. So that wouldn't necessarily bring down their chances of getting affordable housing, would it?
Good question. And I think this is, when we get into discussions, this relates to questions on like policies and strategies. And so, yes, traditionally, when there's affordable housing, there are general wait lists, but when there's more housing, there is more opportunity. And there are policies that some cities have put into place where they think of anti-displacement. So like if they're going to look at your neighborhood and they want to build like in the area where you live, something that's at a higher level, that it's like the right of, like you have that opportunity to be one of the first ones to be able to live in one of those units, or there's an opportunity for you to go somewhere else. And so there's a lot of cities that are already starting to think of these things. And this is one of the things that we can talk about more after I show the alternatives, but that there's also going to be more time to talk about when we get to the zoning and like the specific like policy mechanisms to make sure that these designations, that where we want to have housing, that it actually works and that folks can actually stay.
Okay.
And then would you want to add anything else, Dave?
Sorry, was on. No, that was great. That was great. These
Okay.
questions are fantastic. Thank you so much. You're very thoughtful questions. And as Diana mentioned, as you see further in the presentation, as we get kind of more into the sub areas and a little bit more detail about what's planned for each, that might answer a couple of these questions as we go through. But Monique, I see your hand up. Do you have another thought?
Yeah, I just wanted to kind of ask more about, I know we're kind of developing in sustainability throughout the different parts of South City, but just kind of wanted to ask about how that's going to be applicable to like some of the areas on Hickey Boulevard that are kind of more, or I guess they're not really, I guess, park orientated. They don't have a lot of green and things going on. So.
Diana, do you have a thought on that?
So I will say I think one of the things that we're working on is there was a master plan for parks done a few years ago that we're pulling from there. They have areas where they're thinking of having potential parks. So you'll be seeing that when we get into the alternatives, but also seeing how to improve connectivity and to make things a little safer. Like we have heard from some folks that they're not as comfortable, for example, like using like the Centennial Trail. And so we're thinking of how to make these spaces more safer and more efficient so that you have that opportunity to get closer to those open spaces. And then there's also, I believe in these examples, especially because like Hickey Boulevard is near the BART station, when you create these mixed use centers and nodes, there's opportunities, like it's not just for housing and jobs, but there could also be opportunities for like open spaces and like plazas or like opportunities for gathering. Does that answer your question?
Yes.
I also have
Right.
a sustainability question. Is there like a plan to say like every new development has to have like say solar panels or something?
I don't think that there's a plan within the city that does that, but I will say that the state of California, their energy efficiency, there's discussions like if you're developing affordable housing that's up to like a certain level, like it needs to be energy efficient, and in some cases 100% energy efficient. And so a lot of these policies, because they have a plan to try to, you know, reach net zero by a certain point in the future, by like maybe 2040. And so these policies, like they're gonna end up being passed down to cities to see how they end up developing. Did you have anything else to add to that, Dave?
Yeah, I mean, I will just say that there is a program called Cal Green that's basically redoing how cities imagine like zoning and standards and what's important to the city and how they push that forward. And it's something cities, almost all cities, including South San Francisco, have to think about as the zoning code and everything else gets rewritten to not only incentivize, but in some ways strongly encourage things like solar panels. So I do think it's something that's becoming more and more on the forefront now, and that cities are thinking about. Yeah, great question.
And then I think, yeah, the last thing that I would add is, I may have not mentioned it at the very beginning, that this general plan also includes a CAP. It's a climate action plan. And so we really are in the back end doing analyses and really looking at like greenhouse gas reductions. And so once we start getting to like those zoning designations and we start thinking about like specific policies, like those are things that we can talk about.
Great. Great questions all. Maybe we'll go ahead and push forward here, and then there'll definitely be more opportunity for questions as we move through, but thank you for all those great thoughts. Back to you, Diana.
Yeah, definitely. So when we were looking at those 7 big ideas that I mentioned earlier, we were thinking about, okay, so downtown, that's the heart, and that's one of the cores of the city. We also have activity centers that are throughout the city. So these are areas where folks have access to different amenities and to different services, and they're throughout the city. Like I said, like we have the civic center area, and we have the neighborhood centers in Westboro that Monique, you'll see in one of our alternatives, we have a proposed recommendation for that. Then we also are looking at these multimodal corridors to once again think about how to make the city more accessible for folks to walk, bike, and take transit. And then not only just to get like from one activity center to another, but also from like their houses to the activity centers, from schools to another place. And so just trying to make it more efficient and safe. And then last but not least, we do have that transforming of Colma Creek. And so it connects with the multimodal corridor because it's trying to see how to make it more efficient. Like I said, the walking, the biking, and taking transit, and also just connecting more folks to nature and having more spaces for gathering. And so we really were looking at it like this on the ground. And then I also wanted to touch on what we mean by transform Colma Creek. I'm sure a lot of you have been involved with the Colma Creek adaptation planning and like the resilient by design work that has been happening in the last few years. And so it really focuses on letting the water flow because it is a waterway to allow water to pass through so it doesn't flood the area. And because we know climate change is happening, we need to make sure it continues doing its job. But we also talk about it letting it grow, having that access to the ecology, to nature, to biodiversity, because at the end of the day, it does serve as a channel, but it was a creek. It is a creek. And so really trying to bring it back. And then last but not least, access, letting people go to the creek, letting people like enjoy the nature and thinking about providing more opportunities for like being near nature, like some open space, some gathering spaces, those types of opportunities. And once again, like making it more efficient for people that are going to be like walking, biking, or taking transit to get from like, you know, where it is like in east of 101 into like downtown in Lindenville and into like Orange Park and through the rest of the city. And so whenever we say transform Colma Creek, this is what we're talking about. And so I want to jump into the alternatives. And so you'll notice that these, excuse me, there's a lot of colors going on. And so similarly, when I showed you the current general plan, these are projections saying that if we do this in the city till 2040, what is it going to what's going to happen to housing and jobs? And later on, you're going to see what's going to happen to transit, what's going to happen to greenhouse gas like emissions. And so this alternative, it also continues to create a lot of jobs for the city, and it helps create more housing, but it still doesn't get us to that balance. And so it's still, that ratio is still worse. And so in particular, what you're seeing that's happening with these alternatives, I'm gonna zoom into the different sub areas. So we're gonna go into downtown, then we're gonna talk east of 101, then we're gonna talk Lindenville, then we're gonna talk El Camino, and then I'm gonna show a few examples in other parts of the city. And so for downtown, this maintains the mixed use down core, and this is what was in the current general plan, and that's also what's in the downtown station area plan. And then there's also extending mixed use here, north along Airport Boulevard, to provide a gateway from sister cities to have that opportunity for housing and jobs, and to allow that like entrance into like downtown. And there's also allowing mixed use patterns that are at medium and high to go down to Como Creek, so that folks who would live near Como Creek could have that opportunity to be near all of the changes that could be happening around Como Creek. And then when you look at east of 101, one of the big things is creating a transit-oriented community. And this would be mixed use, so it would be housing and jobs. And you would also notice that the office research and development to the right would grow throughout most of east of 101. And I will note that in the current general plans and also in the existing city plan, existing land use, you have industrial here. So in this alternative, that would no longer be there. And that's why for Lindenville, there is a focus on maintaining an industrial core in Lindenville. And then when we start to look at El Camino, you're going to notice in all three alternatives, there's that focus on the three mixed use centers, like at BART, at Chestnut, and then at that El Camino Real Spruce Huntington area. And so it's creating those mixed use neighborhood centers so that there are access to more amenities, and there's also more housing. And you'll notice that this keeps the El Camino heights that are in the current general plan. And so the other thing I wanted to mention is that in this alternative, we also have a mixed use center in Westboro. So right now that center only allows commercial uses. And this alternative could potentially have retail uses as well as housing, which could be senior housing, it could be apartments, it could be a lot of things. And so I think to Monique's question, what you'll notice, like I said earlier, is that a lot of the alternatives focus on east of 101. They focus on Lindenville, downtown, and El Camino. And I do also want to notice, I'm realizing we're using a slightly updated slide deck, but I didn't include what the note changes would look like. But in this area, like for downtown, all that we are recommending for change would be this area that's down here. And there would be this area here and this right here. And so as we were doing these alternatives, when it came to thinking about where to add housing, a lot of where we were thinking of adding it is in places like in Lindenville where there is no housing, and in east of 101 where there is no housing. But you are right that the east side of the city is where you had a lot of the uses that were non-residential, and because of that, they're next to downtown, and so there are impacts there. And then I also wanted to show you for each of these, I want to give you an idea of those building blocks, those place types that I showed, what it could look like. And so the commercial transit core, where like the housing would be and the amenities, having the medium density mixed use here by the creek, the business technology park, the low density mixed use here, and the high density mixed use here. And then this is alternative 2. And I'm going to go through all of the alternatives just so we can all get a better idea of what they're all showing, and then we can talk about it. but I already see one question. Yes, I can. I can give you an idea of that. I think, yes, I can give you an idea of what the general feedback has been from the community and also from the CAC, the Advisory Council. So for alternative 2, this how jobs stays pretty much the same. Housing increases a little more. And so we're getting closer to a jobs housing balance. You'll notice that when we look at downtown, it's still maintaining that mixed use down core, which is what's in the current general plan and what's in that specific plan for downtown. There's also creating a mixed use neighborhood center here in this area. And so it's thinking about bringing more housing, but also bringing more amenities to that area. And then we also have the mixed use patterns at like medium and high density going to Como Creek and past Como Creek down to Lindenville. And so what you also see is that we have in East of 101, that transit-oriented community grows bigger. And so it's just getting, you know, it's going more to the east and it's going more north and it's going more south. And it's thinking about how to get a closer connection to not only to what's going down, happening downtown, but also just being able to provide more housing and more amenities. And then you'll notice that when we start looking at like the residential, the research and development in the office, it gets a darker brown, and then the industrial also gets a darker gray. And so that means that we want to maintain them, but there's an idea of also increasing the density. And this falls in line, especially for the industrial, of increasing the density so that it's more feasible for them to stay, and then also to have investments to be able to protect from the sea level rise that's going to be happening in East of 101 and in Lindenville. And then when we get to Lindenville, like I said, it's bringing down that opportunity for housing down closer to Victory, and then having offices further south there. And you will notice that then that makes it so there is no more industrial in Lindenville. And that's also one of the other reasons why industrial was intensified, or the density was increased in East of 101. And then for El Camino, you still have those 3 centers, but you will notice that the heights were reduced along El Camino. And this is from feedback that we heard last year and a lot of feedback that the city had received with developments like the PUC, where folks wanted the heights to be more closer to what the neighborhood looks like right now on the ground. And then we also have down here an opportunity for residential and mixed use at that area where that old Safeway is. And then the last thing is that we also had an idea for allowing housing on these old school sites. And I will say one of them is on phase 4 of like workforce housing for teachers. And Ethan raised his hand.
Good catch. Yeah.
Oh, I just wanted to say that I really disagree with the lower, or the, like, basically the downzoning of the El Camino, because that's the place that it should be like heavily upzoned. And so I just wanted to say I really disagree with that.
Thanks, Ethan.
Thank you. And then we had, go for it.
No, look like Monique had her hand raised as well.
Yeah, so I just kind of wanted to understand more of the idea behind downzoning El Camino. Does it have anything to do with like traffic? I know El Camino High School is right there, so that might play a part. I just kind of wanted to understand a little bit more of where that comes from.
Yeah. So I think, like I mentioned earlier, that has in large part to do with a lot of the feedback that we received. And also when you look at the residential areas, like not necessarily on the west side, but like on the east side of El Camino Real, the parcels, like when it comes to like the ones right on El Camino Real to the ones like right behind them onto the other neighboring streets is where you tend to get more residential. They're really close together. And so there was a lot of feedback from those residents that because they're so close together, there's a concern if there are super tall, or not super tall, but there are taller buildings. And what we also noticed is that the last general plan had those higher heights, but there hadn't been any developments up until like a development like the PUC that would get there. And so that's why one of the things that we have and that we've been talking about are things like residential transitions, where we not only take into consideration like what's making it so that folks feel comfortable, so that there is like an appropriate transition when it comes from going from a commercial area into a residential area, or from like an office area into a residential area, or from like an industrial area into a residential area. And it's something that we're thinking of applying, whether we're looking at like El Camino right now as alternative 2 or even as alternative 1. But like what I started saying initially was that there was folks really wanted to try to keep what it looks like right now on the ground existing wise in terms of height. And I believe PUC, Tony isn't on the call, but I think PUC is going up to, is it 5 to 8 stories? And so it would all allow other buildings to only go up to about that height.
And how many stories would it be able to go up to if it was upzoned?
It can potentially go up higher. This is originally a presentation of like 70 slides, and I had more of the land use types. And so high density could be of a range, if I'm trying to remember off the top of my head, like potentially like 8 to 10 stories. And there's a range. So like we're talking about these as ranges, because then once we get to like the zoning conversations, then we can specify on like how much, you know, like whether we're more comfortable having it closer to 8 or closer to 9 or like closer to 10.
And I will mention it, and you probably know more about this since your head's been into it than I, but there's also, it's called the, I just totally blanked on the name, but it's an initiative for all of El Camino Real and all the regional the cities and communities that surround it, that they're also kind of creating a vision for El Camino Real that most cities are kind of trying to buy into, that also somewhat impacts what can go and how that integrates with surrounding communities and cities as it comes up to the borders. So that could have the Grand Boulevard Initiative just popped in my head. So that slightly does impact what's happening along El Camino Real and what can be proposed along El Camino Real. So there's multiple factors that are kind of weighing in on what's available and what can change. Just want to kind of throw that out there. I saw that you were about to answer Ethan's, or do you want to read it off?
I was just about to read it. Isn't the residential transition complaint a bigger reason to have more medium density housing in current R1 single family neighborhoods? It can be, but I will also say that traditionally in the United States, single family residential areas they don't like height and they don't like these types of things. And so this is something that we can take back to the city and say. And I will say, I know Monique was asking about further comments and like what we were hearing from other folks is that a lot of folks were preferring alternative 1 because it retained those heights, and they thought that that was an opportunity to add more housing. And so we've actually been getting a lot more folks liking alternative 1. And then, yes, and that is something that we can take back when we're starting to see what segments of each alternative people like and people don't like. And like we've had recommendations of like folks, like what Ethan was saying. Ethan was in my group and we talked about El Camino, increasing the density around BART. Like that was one of the big things that folks were asking. And then, and then trying to figure out how to better balance, like especially what's going down in Lindenville. But there was an acknowledgement that it's a lot of land and there is some opportunity for housing, but trying to figure out how to make it so that it's not going to directly impact what's happening in downtown. And so really with like a lot of the policy mechanisms, or even like thinking about how we do, like whether it's like all medium or all high, or medium to high, or high to medium, but that's the type of feedback that we've been getting. And I will also add that the school district would prefer that we not include the 2 former school sites as potential for housing.
The school district, sorry, is that for the Sarah Vista and the Fox Ridge schools not to be housing?
Yeah, yeah.
Is the reasoning behind that?
Question
I
regarding.
think they have future. Let me
Yeah,
just
you finish. Sorry.
I was just going to say that I think they have other plans for their sites. But I do know that one of them, I believe it's the Fox Ridge, but they are thinking of turning into workforce housing, but they would prefer that they're not designated as such in this process. And what were you going to say, Ethan?
Oh, so since currently the Fox Ridge site isn't designated for like housing, is that something that can be changed in the future? Or like, let's say the school district wanted to put like high density housing there, or medium or whatever, but it's not zoned for that. How would that get changed in the future?
They would need to apply to get it changed. They would have to go through like the planning commission, and they would have to do an amendment to the general plan. So once like we finalize all of this, they would have to go through paperwork and like a process to get it in.
So even if alternative 2 gets the most votes, we still wouldn't be able to build on Fox Ridge or Sarah Vista, right?
The other thing to note is that they're owned by the school, and so it would be up to the school. So like Fox Ridge, for example, if they are going to turn it into housing, then that wouldn't change as much unless if the designation would have to change. So if they're building the housing, but it's actually high density or it's actually low density, then that would have to change. But what these designations do is that they help develop policy mechanisms to try to get future development to go that way. But there are instances, for example, like we've had a lot of conversations for Lindenville, like in alternative 2, where you're seeing that the only industrial that is being preserved in Lindenville is like down here, that if there are folks that have industrial businesses and they decide that they want to stay and they don't want to sell, then they stay. And there is no way the city can't tell them to move, that it only changes uses once they sell or once they move. And so if we were to have like the former school sites as residential, if the schools board wanted to keep them as schools, then they would stay as schools until they sold or until they decided that they wanted to do something different there. And so it's just, with planning, there's this weird balance, because we're really trying to project like what we want to do in the future, and also anticipating that there are demands that drive the market, but also making sure that we, like, if we want to really like keep housing, if we really want to keep affordable housing, if we want to really like prevent displacement, we have to like put in like policies in place. But it's also set up in a way that like, you know, like it doesn't like kick people off their property. Like once like you leave or you sell, that's when it would change to whatever the new zoning is. Does that make sense?
Yeah. Thank you for clarifying.
Yeah, in the interest of time, I'm going to suggest we keep moving forward here. We're about 12 minutes to 1:30, and I want to respect everyone's time. So there's a few more slides on alternatives, one more poll we want to pass by you all, and then we can hopefully have some room for discussion. We're happy to stay a little bit beyond 1:30, but just want to respect folks' time. So if you want to go on to the next alternative, Diana, we can circle back.
Yeah.
Thanks.
Thank you, Dave. And I will say we actually have been having like some mini discussions throughout, so this has been really great. And so this is what that alternative would look like on the ground. Then when we get to alternative 3, this is an alternative where housing increases, but also jobs increase, but also housing increases a lot too. And it's starting to improve that jobs to housing balance. And like I said, maintaining that mixed-use downtown core as to what's in the specific plan and what's in the general plan. This is also bringing in an opportunity to allow medium density mixed use along Linden for housing as well as jobs. This also in East of 101 increases that transit core even more. And so you see it going down further south, and it especially connects to what's happening in Lindenville. And so it also brings it up to a higher density. And then when you look at the office research and development and the industrial, it maintains them, but it increases their density. And then when you look at Lindenville, you see that that mixed use goes down further south to Victory. But you do see that we do maintain a core of industrial like past Victory, and you also see that we intensify it. And then for El Camino, we are keeping those same three mixed use cores, and this is really similar to what we saw in Alternative 2, where those heights are lowered. And we do have that residential mixed use opportunity in Spruce in the Huntington area. And then once again, we have the former school sites on this side. And then I think, sorry, was it on Hickey? Yeah, no, yeah. And so then this is what it looks like on the ground, what it could look like on the ground. And then I just wanted to show you this table, which is a summary where we take a look at like what are the existing values, what's, if we like implement the current general plan to 2040, what are the numbers going to look like, and then what is it going to look like for alternatives 1, 2, and 3. And we looked at different indicators like population, housing units, total jobs, that balance of jobs for housing, square feet of industrial space, percent of folks walking, biking, and taking transit, and then the greenhouse gas emissions. And what you'll notice is that as we get to alternative from 1 to 3, housing increases more as we go through to like the third alternative. Population increases more, jobs increase a little bit more, jobs per housing, the balance gets better. You'll see that the square footage of industrial space with alternatives 1 and 2, it would be lower than what's in the current general plan. But if you get to alternative 3, it starts getting us closer. And it's actually more closer to what we have right now. And then in terms of walking, biking, and taking transit, it starts getting better. And then greenhouse gas emissions, right now they stay the same. And that's because we haven't applied any policies yet. So once we narrow down to one alternative, we'll start applying a lot more policies and also a lot of like transportation demand policies. And so that's when we're going to start seeing those changes. And then these are all of the alternatives together. And I know they're really tiny, but just to remind you and to give you that perspective. And then we have the poll. So Dave, go for it.
Yeah, so as I mentioned earlier, we just wanted to, I mean, it sounds like you all have been giving some great feedback already. We just wanted to get a quick sense based on what you've seen. And again, feel free to ask any more follow-up questions that you might have, but which one of the alternatives is maybe most preferable to you? And then when we're thinking about the jobs housing balance, if that's important to you, if you think we should be thinking more about housing versus jobs, it's another opportunity to provide feedback on that front as well. So just wanted to give you a couple minutes to weigh in on this, and then we can have a quick follow-up discussion. But this discussion we've had thus far has been excellent. Thank you so much for the thoughtful questions. It's been great. Looks like a couple more of you might need to weigh in. All right, looks like we got everyone now. So I'm going to go ahead and share out the results. Wow. All right, alternative 3 has taken the cake here, it looks like. And I'm interested to find out from you all why. I have a sneaking suspicion as to why. I mean, considering that you also agree that housing is important and that balance is important, obviously alternative 3 probably does the best job of doing that. So I'm assuming that's probably why. But any follow-up thoughts that you all want to share as to why you voted the way you did?
I will say that Ethan in the comments mentioned that he does like 3, but he likes 1 the best for El Camino Real because he thinks that downzoning El Camino Real is a detriment for 2 and 3.
I would also add to Ethan's point that I agree that like El Camino Real should at least have medium density to compromise with the residents that don't like, tall buildings. So I think that that would still hold true to the city's kind of culture and just the overall feel of the city, while still allowing for space for more people to move in. I'd also wanted to say that with alternative one, I like that there's more commercial building in Hickey and Westboro, and I think that's a good opportunity for jobs for people that live in that area. So I would agree that alternative one has benefits in increasing that commercial area. But I would say that like housing definitely is a priority, although I don't agree with it being largely in low income areas, because it essentially makes it harder for the communities that are there to stay there as housing prices will increase. And lastly, I wanted to add another point that's not on any of these plans, but I noticed that there's a limited amount of public space. And I know that that's, again, very hard to control, as you explained with, obviously the restrictions that you guys already face. But if possible, I'd like to suggest kind of increasing a little bit more public space in biotech areas, because biotech essentially has its own culture in South City and can sometimes feel kind of exclusive of certain communities. So allowing for the public, or maybe allowing for a hiking trail or things that go off to because I know that people visit like the piers and people visit the outer parts of the city, which are quite beautiful. It would be nice to have that kind of inclusiveness so that it allows for the cohesion of the city past Grand Avenue.
Great input.
Thank you.
Great.
And I think I was also going to say we had a few discussion questions, and I think we've been talking about this a lot, but since we started with a lot of a focus on housing, and Monique and Ethan and others were talking about how there's a lot more housing on the east side, like what would you all recommend for like the Lindenville area, for example, where we either have it going down just to the creek, or we have it going down all the way to Coma Creek? And I know that a lot of you preferred alternative 3, which had it as a higher intensity. So I want to hear what you all think about that.
Yeah, I also just want to provide some space for Nika or Melissa or Isabella or Ingrid, who we haven't heard much from yet. If you all had some thoughts to share, we'd love to hear it as well. Or any of you. This has been awesome. Don't want to cut the flow at all, but yeah, Isabella, go ahead.
Yeah, piggybacking off of what Monique said about like the biotech industry kind of being its own culture, it's also like, I feel like some of the people that work in the biotech industry like don't live in South City, which is like not a problem that happens like frequently. Like some people in South City work in San Francisco or other areas, but like trying to, so like already that being the increase of jobs in our city, but not having the housing for like the people that do live here and maybe don't work for the biotech. I think that's why housing is like so important as well.
Great. Thank you, Isabella. Any other thoughts from folks? Anyone feel free to jump in. Yeah, okay.
Yeah, I also just wanted to mention that I particularly like alternative 3 because of the increase of housing, but I do want to comment that I felt as though it's a little too idealistic. And I would hope that alternative 3 would be something that we can envision for the city. But realistically speaking, I wanted to sort of understand if it would be a better compromise to increase the housing while also taking bits of alternative 1 and 2, because I know a lot of people also liked alternative 1. It just seems like more of a realistic plan. But I do still want to just mention the fact that the increase of housing is something that I definitely saw in alternative 3 and liked the zoning in that area.
Yeah, that's a fantastic point. I'll let Diana speak to that as well, but we're definitely not necessarily thinking that you'd have to pick, or the community would have to choose any one of the alternatives the way they are. It could definitely end up being a blend between a few. This is just an easy way to kind of distinguish between different types of really intensity and density of housing and jobs and kind of show the scale. But that's a great question, and a good way to kind of think about this is you're not necessarily having to pick one, but you could very easily pick and choose what you like about each. And that final preferred alternative might be a hybrid of those different.
Yeah.
I don't know if you want to add anything to that.
Completely agree.
Yeah, okay.
No, agree. Yes.
Great.
I would say that near Westboro, that's just where I live, and we have kind of near McDonald's and the Aggie Center a lot of housing that was built, I'd say, in the past like 5 years, and there wasn't a lot of opposition to it. In fact, it was really nice because that area was kind of very dead, I would say. Like a lot of like just random weeds, nothing was even really there, and kind of just bringing in that renovation along with renovating the commercial area of like Westboro Square really brought people back in terms of engagement with the community, more kind of money circulating through these local businesses and through the shops on Westboro Square. And I know with Safeway, we have a giant parking lot, and also Orchard Supply has gone out of business. So there's a lot of kind of just empty space there. And I think that there could be some sort of compromise. I know Carol's mentioned this in the past with kind of having a local business incubator area. So it's like a designated space where local businesses can grow their brand in that space with like a cap on rent for a certain amount of time, while also letting, you know, some of the more competitive businesses that the community really wants to see kind of have their chance to fill those empty spaces, because that whole area is just getting very, very old. Businesses are moving out. There's not a lot there. But again, that'd be a great place for commercial and a great place to build more high density housing, because that community, I feel like, isn't as opposed to it. And it'd be great, like even being someone from Westboro, like I really don't mind having more housing built in my area if it means more people get opportunities to stay here.
Yeah. And I will also add that we don't have it mapped throughout, but like there's been policies coming from the state and also from like the county and improvements on policies for accessory dwelling units. So in single family residential areas, being able to build like tiny homes or like mini, like a 1 unit thing in the backyard. I actually live in an accessory dwelling unit in Berkeley, which is where I am right now. But there's been an anticipation that it's been growing throughout the Bay Area and that it's going to continue. And so there's potential for that, but it would still be single family residential zoning, but opportunity for more housing. And then somebody else had raised their hand. You like that? Okay.
Oh, I was just wondering, so I'm on the website right now, on Shape SSF, and maybe I'm misinterpreting this, but I haven't seen anything specifically about Grand. I was just wondering if there's any conversation about Grand and the area surrounding it, because right now there's buildings of like high rises, and I'm wondering if there's plans to keep, because I noticed that my community, so I live near Grand, I'm worried that there might be kicking out of people because of the high rises. So I was just wondering if that was like a discussion going on, or.
And when you say you live by Grand, do you mean like in Old Town?
I live in Cypress, so it's like really close to Grand.
Okay, got it. So it's closer to like Orange Park. Yeah. Okay. So these are a lot of the discussions, like in the downtown meetings that we've been having. There's been a lot of discussions on like concerns on displacement, and that's why, similar to what Ethan was sharing, that's why some folks have had that concern with that mixed use going in Lindenville, like near Como Creek. And so a lot of our conversations have talked about, okay, well, then folks say there's an opportunity to increase, to keep alternative one for El Camino Real, and then we started talking about potential policy mechanisms that we can implement, not just in the short term, like when we first released the general plan, but they can go into the long term. And so it's some of the things that I was recommending. So like if any of the apartment buildings are being sold, like the opportunity for right of first refusal, a lot of tenant protections. And so really focusing on preserving and protecting like existing affordable opportunities and for folks, and then as well as building and just different ways. So there's a lot more like policy things. And so we've started talking about those, and we're going to continue. And you can definitely be involved, and we would love to hear like any other ideas that you have. And I feel like a lot of ideas are also going to be coming from like the mayor's Commission on Racial and Social Equity as well.
So team, just a quick heads up, it's 1:34 now. Again, we're more than happy to stay on and continue the conversation. We just want to respect everyone's time. So just want to put that out there for you all to recognize. I would suggest, do you want to talk through real quick about the survey and the next steps? I think it's really important. We do have a survey out there that we really want to point you all to, and tell all your friends and colleagues to also go to on the website, so you can continue to give this great input. In this case, in a more quantitative versus qualitative, although there is opportunity to provide comments there as well. So I just wanted to make sure we have time for Diana to bring that up. So there you go. Back to you, Diana.
Yeah. So we have surveys going at not just the citywide area, which is what we showed you, but zooming into the specific sub areas that I was telling you about: downtown, El Camino, Lindenville, and east of 101. And then on the website that Isabella had already been on, we have information on more upcoming meetings, primer videos, just to hear more 101s on like what land use is, what the alternatives are, seeing the alternative maps and descriptions, as well as PDFs, links to the surveys, and links to those community meeting videos that we had. And so, like Dave said, it would be awesome if you could go ahead and take the survey and share it with your friends that haven't been involved with the process, because we really do want to hear back. And we have the surveys available in English and in Spanish. And this is just a preview of what the surveys look like in the inside. And so we're really like asking similarly, like, what alternative do you prefer, and like why, how do you rate them? And then starting to talk on strategy. So like, do you prioritize like protecting tenants? Do you prioritize like the preservation of existing affordable housing? Do you like the idea of accessory dwelling units? And so we start zooming into those. And so the idea is once we narrow down on a preferred alternative, like we can then start thinking about what types of like policies and like we can start implementing, or start to think about how they could help to implement the general plan. And so really getting your feedback on these types of things, or if you see that we're missing something, like let us know, and it helps. And the last thing that I just want to also say is we have been finishing up like the sub area wide meetings. Tomorrow we're having a second downtown sub area meeting. It's going to be run in Spanish, and we're going to have interpreters interpreting the Spanish into English, so city staff to be on to hear. And then we have a joint city council planning commission study session on the 19th, where we're going to be giving preliminary feedback on everything that we've been hearing, just so the city council and planning commission can have a better idea, and we can also hear what they're thinking. And then we've been having Ask an SSF Planner every Tuesday in August. So it just started recently from 12 to 1. All that information is also on the website. So if you want to go in to talk about the general plan, if you want to talk specifically about something that you're seeing in your neighborhood, ask away. We have Tony and Billy. They're awesome. And I think usually you have like 5 to like 9 people attending. And so you can ask as many questions as you want. And then, yeah, we're going through this process. Like I said, September, we're going to have a community workshop on the preferred alternative to get your final feedback on it. Then we're going to go to Planning Commission to show the preferred alternative. And then in November, there's going to be a city council meeting again on preferred alternative. And so we want you to continue being involved in this process, and you can send us emails and respond to the survey, and let us know if you have any questions. And I hope that we can have another session like this again in the next few months once we get down the process. So thank you so much.
Thanks. It looks like Nika had a question.
Yes, I have a quick question. Many of the concerns that I've been feeling, I know it sounds like I haven't been talking much, but it's that they've been covered by others. But I had one question looking at the survey real quick about rent control, because I've been, as a victim whose family's been displaced by increasing rent a few times, I was just wondering if it was true that South San Francisco has no formal policy on rent control, or is it true? I just want to make sure.
Do you know
that is a good question. I do not know the answer off of the top of my head. I know that the work that we've been doing with the general plan is working on the usual tenets that when you think of housing, like preserving, like building and protecting, and that's one of the things that we are looking at. And
Is
would you want
there-
to say anything to that, Dave? Yeah, and I can get back to you as well.
Thank you. Is there anything the city can do to impose on landowners and landlords that can control rent pacing for tenants so that we don't have to be so overwhelmed by things like that? Or like just to
Different cities
I don't know how else to-
No, different cities do have rent control. So I live in Berkeley, and I do have a rent control system set up, and so it's something that cities have to create policies for. And I think that I can ask Tony and Billy to get back to you all on that, and we can get an email. And I think that's also a really good question to take to the ASCA planner on Tuesday from 12 to 1 p.m. just to start that discussion. But yeah.
Thank you.
Yeah, thank you all. I mean, this has been amazing. As usual, you all really kind of impress us with your extremely thoughtful questions. Quite frankly, the questions you're asking are way more ingrained in the community in some cases than the questions we're hearing from in the large community groups we've been having. You all definitely get it, and we really appreciate it. And I want to continue to encourage you, especially with the questions coming about what other community members have been saying. I really want to encourage you all to attend the community workshops. They're all virtual now, so they're much easier to access. One, to hear what others are saying, but two, to make sure that your voice is heard in that arena as well is really important. Obviously, we're going to bring all this information forward. We'll create a summary. We'll make sure it's part of the larger discussion, but we haven't been seeing as many folks kind of in your demographic at those meetings, and would love to see more of you there. So just want to put in a plug to make it to the downtown meeting maybe on Monday, or definitely future meetings in the future, because we'd love to see you all there. Yeah, I mean, with that, was there any questions, any final questions that you all had for us, or any other follow-up on what you've heard before we wrap it up? No? All right. Again, thank you so much for your time. We'll make sure that we'll kind of wrap up all these final thoughts and summary, and we can send it back out to you all, but also be posted on the project website. But keep us informed. You have the information on the project website to get a hold of us. If any other questions, any other thoughts come up, the presentations, all that is up on the website as well. So you could always go back and reference it if you have any follow-up questions. But it was great spending some time with you today, and we look forward to crossing paths again sometime in the near future.
Thank you so much. It's a great job.
Thank you. All
Thanks.
right, all.
Bye.
Thank you.
Have a great rest of your weekend. Bye.
Bye.